The street was quiet that evening in Auburn Hill, as if the small Georgia town had decided to hold its breath. Heat still lingered in the air, 84 degrees Fahrenheit. At sundown, the sidewalks radiating warmth, back up through the soles of Mrs. Clara Mayfield's shoes. She walked slowly, her senses tuned to the world's language. The distant hum of a lawnmower, a child's laughter echoing down Sycamore Street, the gentle tap-tap of her white cane, marking each step. To Clara, the cane was more than a guide. It was a piece of her husband, the last gift he'd left before cancer took him 7 years ago. His initials JM were carved near the handle, worn smooth by years of her grasp. She approached the curb at Maple Avenue, waiting patiently as cars passed by. Clara lifted her face to the evening breeze, adjusted her sunglasses and listened. The light click of a crossing signal, the hush of tires on asphalt. These were the details she trusted. She stepped forward, her cane tapping out a path toward the opposite side, only to be met by a sudden sharp voice that cut through the twilight like broken glass. "You think you can just walk out wherever you want?" Officer Doug Riker's words struck with the force of a slap. Clara paused, 1 foot on the street, her cane extended. The officer's boots scraped the curb as he moved closer, casting a shadow that Clara couldn't see but felt all the same. His breath, heavy with coffee and impatience, hovered just above her ear. "I just wanted to cross the street," Clara replied, her voice calm but uncertain. She heard movement around her, a mother tugging a child back, a group of teens falling silent, the click of a phone's camera quietly being activated. The officer's radio hissed static. He stepped in front of her, blocking her way, and with one sudden motion, his hand clamped around the cane. "That cane, you don't deserve it." His voice was sharp and mocking. A loud snap echoed across the asphalt as Officer Riker brought his heel down hard. The white cane broke in two with the brittle crack of splintering bone. Clara stumbled backward, one hand clutching the air, the other still gripping half a cane. Her glasses slipped crooked on her face. A scratch marked her cheek. She inhaled shakily, tasting the copper of humiliation and disbelief. People watched, but no one stepped forward. Phones recorded screens glinting in the evening light, but voices stayed hushed. The street, usually filled with the bustle of neighbors and families, became an arena of silent spectators. Only the sound of the broken cane rolling into the gutter seemed to move anyone. Officer Riker bent down, his tone turning cold as iron. "Being blind isn't a free pass to disobey orders. Next time, bring someone to guide you." His lips nearly touched Clara's ear, his words intended for her alone, but the entire block felt their chill. Then he was gone, boots stomping away, leaving Clara on the curb, broken cane in hand, the other half out of reach. She sat down, knees folding to the warm concrete. The world didn't move. She could feel the stares, the tension in the air. A teenage barista from the corner cart. James set down his coffee cup, hands trembling, but did not speak. A woman across the street whispered to her child, her words drifting away like so much dust. Clara's hand shook as she ran her fingers over the letters on what remained of her cane. "Jem, you walk proud." The memory of her husband's voice played gently in her mind, soft as the hush of wind through the sycamore leaves. She did not cry. She did not beg. She simply breathed the air, tasting suddenly unfamiliar, as if Auburn Hill itself had changed in the space of a minute. Silence pressed in from every side, a heavy, shattering quiet, more violent than any outburst. No one approached. No one asked if she was all right. In that vacuum, Clara made a decision. For 30 years, she had swallowed indignity, let the world's callousness pass by in silence. But this time, her hand reached for her purse and found her phone. She dialed her son Malcolm in Washington, D.C. The ringtone sounded distant, each note pulling her further from the numbness of the moment. When he answered, she spoke only one sentence. "Sweetheart, I'm okay, but something happened." There was a pause, a single measured breath at the other end. "Send me the video," Malcolm said. "I don't want revenge, Mom, but I can't accept silence either." Clara pressed the phone to her chest, drawing strength from its weight. Around her, the town resumed its slow rhythm. Cars passed, doors closed, children's laughter picked up again. But for Clara, the world had shifted, not just because her cane was broken or because she had been shamed in front of neighbors, but because this time she would not let silence win. As twilight deepened, Clara gathered the two halves of her cane, running her thumb across the inscription one last time. She rose, straightened her sunglasses, and walked slowly home, letting the rhythm of her shoes on concrete remind her that even in darkness, she could still choose her path. She did not know what would come next, only that the silence on Maple Avenue had finally been broken. As the streetlights began to flicker on Auburn Hill, quietly braced for the ripples that one broken cane would send through its heart. In the hours that followed, Auburn Hill moved with a kind of uneasy quiet, a silence less about peace than about the things left unsaid. The morning after the incident, the town's usual routines felt altered, as if the air itself had thickened with discomfort. Across Rosewood Park, the red brick pathway held the memory of what had happened. James, the teenage coffee vendor, wheeled his cart onto the grass before dawn, but he played no jazz this time. He wiped the counter longer than needed, his hands moving without purpose. A few blocks away, inside a narrow kitchen smelling faintly of orange peel and mint tea, Clara Mayfield sat at her table with the broken cane laid before her. The two pieces, splintered and scarred, rested on a faded handkerchief that had belonged to her husband. She tied them together with a thin silver ribbon, her movements careful, almost ceremonial. Each knot was a silent promise to herself that what had been broken would not be forgotten. For Clara, the cane had never been just an object. It had been a companion, a lifeline, and the last unspoken word of a marriage that had withstood more storms than most. She didn't venture out that morning. Instead, she moved slowly about her home fingers, reading familiar grooves in the wooden door frame, ears tuned to the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down Willow Lane. The world had always spoken to her through touch, sound, and memory. Now every sensation seemed sharper, every noise outside a reminder that she had become, once again, the object of someone else's judgment. At the edge of the park, people gathered in soft clusters, talking in low voices. The video of what happened on Maple Avenue had already begun to circulate, first among students at the high school, then quietly on neighborhood group chats. Someone made a post on a local forum, not with outrage, but with a careful, almost clinical detachment. Incident with officer and elderly woman, anyone know details? Comments stacked beneath, some defensive, some uncertain. The hashtag You're Auburn Hill Blind trended briefly, drawing a mix of sympathy and cynical jokes from outsiders. For the people who had been there, though, it was not so easily dismissed. James's nerves still raw, watched as an older woman he'd seen before lingered at the park's edge, looking as if she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Each person carried their own version of the event, replaying the moment when Officer Riker's heel came down, some with regret, others with guilt. For years, Auburn Hill had been a place where things happened quietly, almost invisibly. Now that invisibility had been shattered. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Washington, D.C., Malcolm Carter closed the door to his apartment and set his phone on the kitchen counter. He stood for a long moment, his reflection wavering in the window against the nighttime skyline. On the screen, the video replayed the sharp command, the metallic snap, his mother's quiet endurance. Malcolm watched the clip twice, face unreadable, his hand gripping the countertop so tightly his knuckles paled. He moved to his bedroom, kneeling beside the old steel case tucked under the bed. Inside, a copy of his law license, a federal clearance badge, and a new white cane wrapped in silk. It was meant as a gift for his mother, a backup just in case. Now it felt like a lifeline of a different kind. Malcolm's fingers hovered over the badge, tracing the raised letters, DOJ. These were the tools he used not just to seek justice, but to dismantle the kind of indifference that could hollow out a town. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Don't react. Watch everything before you act. You and I both know men like this never act alone. Malcolm's jaw tightened. For years, he'd carried the weight of being the one to fix things, to walk into rooms where the air was thick with denial and make people see what they'd rather ignore. He typed a message to the Auburn Hill mayor's office, formal, direct, offering no room for evasion. I'll be arriving Friday. I want to meet with the police department's representative, the head of the disciplinary committee, and Officer Doug Riker himself. I will not ask for apologies. I will ask you to prove why you are still in your positions. When the mayor's office received Malcolm's email, a wave of nervous anticipation rolled through City Hall. Secretaries whispered in the corridors. The chief of police locked his office door for nearly an hour. Even Officer Riker, swaggering down Main Street, could sense the mood shift, a subtle prickling awareness that eyes were now following him for reasons other than fear. Back in Clara's home, sunlight pooled on the kitchen table as she poured herself a cup of tea. She set the broken cane beside her, running her fingertips along the jagged edge. The world outside continued on, neighbors mowing their lawns, children pedaling bicycles up and down the street. But inside, Clara waited, her thoughts steady and measured. She did not want pity. She wanted the silence to break for good. Across Auburn Hill, those who had witnessed the scene on Maple Avenue began to feel a different kind of discomfort. Some called it shame, others a restless unease. They remembered how no one had stepped forward, how the only sounds had been the sharp crack of a cane and the quick collective intake of breath. Even as they carried out their routines, a question lingered. What would happen now that someone with real authority had decided to care? As the sun set over the park that evening, the town's silence was no longer one of apathy. It was the hush before a reckoning, a pause as everyone from city officials to teenagers with trembling hands waited to see what would come of the line that had finally been crossed. And so while Clara poured her tea and Malcolm packed his case, Auburn Hill found itself holding its breath, knowing that in just a few days, the true weight of their silence would be measured in the light of justice yet to come. The Friday morning sun rose pale over Auburn Hill, casting long shadows across the brick facade of City Hall. Dew glistened on the courthouse lawn. The usual hum of small-town routine was replaced by something sharper, an undercurrent of anticipation, the kind that made even the birds in the oaks pause their song. Today was not like other days. Inside City Hall, the air felt close and still. Rows of wooden chairs filled the third-floor chamber, their polished backs reflecting nervous faces. Town officials arrived early, some clutching folders, others glancing anxiously at the clock on the far wall. The room was filled with the quiet shuffling of papers and the low hum of whispered speculation. Officer Doug Riker sat near the front, arms crossed tightly, his badge shining as if daring anyone to question it. Then, with little fanfare, Malcolm Carter stepped in through the doors. He wore a crisp black shirt collar buttoned and carried a slim silver case at his side. His shoes made no sound on the marble floor. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to tilt toward him, every pair of eyes drawn not to his title, but to the calm purpose in his movements. Without raising his voice, Malcolm greeted the committee and placed the silver case on the table. From inside, he removed three things: a red investigation file, a single iPad, and the broken cane, its halves aligned with care. He laid them out with the deliberation of a man accustomed to handling evidence not just of a crime, but of a history that too many had tried to forget. He began his tone even and clear: ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here as an angry son. I'm here as a federal officer asking why a man who was internally investigated in Baton Rouge, suspended in Little Rock, and nearly dismissed in Savannah, was hired in Auburn Hill without so much as a single question. A stir rippled through the chamber. The head of recruitment, Mr. Dempsey, tried to stand, but Malcolm continued, sliding a printed file across the table. Your signature appears here, 2019 clearance file page, 4 line 11, just under the line that reads, "No criminal or disciplinary record." The paper trembled in Dempsey's grasp. Officer Riker straightened his back, jaw clenched, a faint smile lingering on his lips, as if rehearsed for just this sort of scrutiny. For the first time, Malcolm looked at him directly. Officer Riker, I'm not asking you to apologize to my mother. I'm asking you to explain to this room, in front of your colleagues and community, why you thought it was just to snap a blind woman's cane in broad daylight and to feel nothing wrong about it. Riker's eyes narrowed. I was doing my job. She was walking unaccompanied. That's a safety hazard. His words, loud and sharp, seemed to rattle against the marble walls. Malcolm tilted his head undeterred. And that hazard had the shape of a 72-year-old woman crossing in a marked pedestrian lane. She resisted. She had an attitude. Riker spat, as if hoping the accusation would stick. Malcolm stepped forward and with a gentle tap played the video on the iPad. The room filled with sound, the soft call of birds, the muted city hum, the sudden command, the chilling snap of cane against boot, and then, most hauntingly, Clara Mayfield's voice, steady, dignified. That cane, my husband left it to me. The recording ended with Riker's low whisper, each word weighted with disdain. Being blind isn't a free pass to go wherever you want. When the room fell silent, no one looked at Riker. A woman on the committee gripped her chair arms until her knuckles paled. Someone behind her quietly wiped at his eyes. Malcolm's face stayed calm. "Let me ask again. Who did you think you were representing when you did that?" Riker's confidence flickered, replaced by a thin mask of defiance. "I'm a police officer. I keep order." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Order. And does that order include humiliation and intimidation, breaking someone's last thread of dignity, simply because you assumed no one would speak up for them?" Riker shot up from his seat, voice cracking. "I'm not scared of you. You're not my boss." Malcolm didn't blink. He lowered his voice, the room leaning in to hear. "You're right. I'm not your boss. But I am the one who signed off on 2 federal indictments for officers in the last 24 months. And if your written report doesn't match the scene evidence within 72 hours, I'll be the one signing your prosecution file as well." The silence that followed was unlike any before, thick, expectant, alive, with the possibility that things might at last change. The committee adjourned without debate. The chief clerk typed up the motion. Officer Doug Riker was suspended, effective immediately, his case forwarded to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division before noon. That evening, local news didn't show sirens or spectacle, but a quiet photograph: Clara Mayfield standing at her front door, sunlight warm on her silver hair, her hand resting gently on the railing. The headline read, "The Woman Who Didn't Need Sight to See Justice." Back in her small kitchen, Clara listened to the broadcast, her thumb tracing the inscription on the new cane Malcolm had left for her. She knew this was not the end. Justice was not applause or punishment. It was a door newly opened, a path she had always known, but which others were only just beginning to find. As dust settled over Auburn Hill, the people of the town carried home a new understanding. The true measure of justice is found not in noise, but in the quiet strength that refuses to look away. 3 days after the hearing, Auburn Hill gathered for a meeting unlike any before. There were no agenda sheets, no budget tallies, or zoning arguments, just a town called together to listen. The Auburn Hill Community Library, usually a place for story hour and silent reading, overflowed with people. Some leaned against bookshelves, others stood outside, pressed to the windows, their faces framed by July sunlight. On the small wooden stage beside a microphone patched with white tape sat an armchair, plain and unadorned. Mrs. Clara Mayfield, dressed in a neat brown coat and silk scarf, held a new white cane close. The initials CM never again shone softly on its handle. Her presence stilled the crowd. Even those who'd never spoken to her recognized the quiet gravity of a woman who had walked for decades with her head held high. She rose, placing her hand lightly on the microphone fingers, tracing its battered plastic edges. There was no shaking in her voice, only the surety of a truth carried too long in silence. "I am blind," she began, "but I have never been blind to the truth." A hush fell. Outside, the summer cicadas sang. Clara's words moved gently, but with a force that filled every corner of the room. "Last week, my cane was broken in front of you all." No one said a word. "I do not blame you. I have lived long enough to know that silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is survival." In the second row, the girl who filmed this video pressed trembling hands to her face. James, the coffee vendor, watched, his head bowed and his eyes shining. Clara continued, voice even and clear. "In 1972, I was refused service at the diner on Elm Street. When I protested, I was cuffed. Someone took a photograph. It was never published. It sits in a box in my home beside my wedding picture. My husband served this country in uniform, but came home to spit on his shoes and doors shut in his face. That is not just history. That is the truth that shaped me and shapes this town." She lifted a small photograph, handing it to Malcolm, who stood quietly to her right. He raised it for all to see, a young black woman, hands bound, standing outside a shop beneath a sign that read, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Clara's next words did not tremble. "For 28 years, I walked through Rosewood Park and never fell. Not until someone decided I needed to fall so they could stand a little taller. I want no pity. What happened to me will happen to someone else if we do not stand up together. I may not see, but I hear every word spoken behind my back. I feel hands tremble when I do not." Her words washed over the crowd, some wiped tears, others simply listened, silent and unmoving, their shame replaced by something deeper: understanding. "I do not ask for apologies. I ask you to remember, silence is not peace. Silence is the first crack in a community's heart. We must listen with more than our ears. We must see with more than our eyes. No applause followed. Instead, a slow movement swept through the room. One by one, people stood. First James, then the librarian, then the mayor, then even Officer Riker's own cousin, until nearly every seat was empty, and the only sound was the gentle tapping of Clara's cane on the stage. That evening, the city maintenance crew replaced the old sign at the entrance to Rosewood Park. In its place gleamed a new brass plaque, carefully etched and newly polished, catching the last golden rays of sunlight, in honor of Mrs. Clara Mayfield, who needed no eyes to see, injustice and no guide to walk the path toward justice. The town did not return to its old ways. Stories of Clara's courage spread first to the state capitol, then further her story featured in newspapers and news segments from Atlanta to Chicago. Letters arrived at the library. Children from the elementary school drew her picture. Her head lifted, her cane shining. The conversations changed. In coffee shops, in church pews, and even in city council meetings, the old habit of looking away was slowly replaced by a new willingness to look directly at what needed to be faced. A month later, on Clara's 73rd birthday, townspeople gathered in Rosewood Park. There were no speeches, only a simple unveiling of a small bronze statue, a blind woman standing tall, cane in one hand, the other resting over her heart. The base read, "She walked without sight but never without purpose." The statue was not just for Clara, it was for everyone who had ever been ignored, dismissed, or quietly erased from the story of a town. It was a promise cast in bronze that Auburn Hill would try imperfectly but sincerely to remember what silence costs. Malcolm stood at the back, his arm resting on the shoulder of James's young daughter. He leaned down, voice soft. "Do you know who she is?" The little girl nodded. "She's Mrs. Clara. She has the prettiest cane in the world." Malcolm smiled. "That's right. And once someone tried to take it away." "Do you know who gave it back?" She shook her head wide-eyed. He whispered, "All of us, when we stopped looking and started seeing." That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table, new cane by her side, the scent of tea rising in the quiet. Her son poured her a cup, and as music played softly from an old radio, she finally let herself rest. She needed no rescuing, never had. What she needed and now had at last was a community willing to speak up when she could not. In the months that followed, Auburn Hill helped launch a statewide initiative, Project Clara, a mandatory training for law enforcement on dignity and unseen injustice. It would become a model for towns across Georgia and beyond. The story did not end with cheers or banners. It ended as it began, with a woman who walked nearly her whole life down unmarked roads in a town that finally learned to walk with her. And so Auburn Hill learned that justice, though quiet, is the step that others learn, to follow a legacy born not of sight, but of courage and heart.